Hi, fourth grade. I'm so glad you're here today, and we are going to read chapter 14, The Dodecahedron Leads the Way. Now, that's a really tough word to say, dodecahedron. And actually, a dodecahedron in math is a shape. Now, I know you guys have talked with Miss Taylor about three-dimensional shapes. You probably talked about cones and pyramids, and these shapes are three-dimensional, right? They could stand up, and you can actually hold on to them. And in this story, a dodecahedron is like a shape with 12 sides. So it has many, many, many different sides to it. And I looked up a picture for you guys so you could see what it actually looks like. If I can get it up here. And so if you look, so these are examples of a dodecahedron. Almost looks like an octagon. And so it has 12 different sides on it. Kind of cool looking, right? Okay, so the dodecahedron leads the way. So this gives me an idea, if we're talking about math, they're probably in Dictionopolis. And the last time we read, we had Milo and Talk and the Humbug, and they landed in conclusions. They jumped to conclusions, remember, when we talked about that being an expression that we use sometimes, but they literally jumped and landed on an island called conclusions. And they got off the island. They had to swim to get off. It was harder to get off an island of conclusions than to get onto it. But they swam off the island, and now they are headed toward Dictionopolis again. Up ahead, the road divided into three. And as if in reply to Milo's question, the enormous road sign pointing in all three directions stated clearly, Dictionopolis, 5 miles, 1,600 rods, 8,800 yards, 26,400 feet, 316,800 inches, and 633,600 half inches, and then some. Let's travel by miles, advised the Humbug. It's shorter. Let's travel by half inches, suggests Milo. It's quicker. But which road should we take? Asked Talk. It must make a difference. As they argued, a most particular little figure stepped nimbly from behind the sign and approached them, talking all the while. Yes, indeed it does. Certainly, yes, it does make a difference, undoubtedly. He was constructed, for that really is the only way to describe him, of a large assortment of lines and angles connecting together in one solid, many-sided shape. Somewhat like a cube that had all its corners cut off and then had all its corners cut off again. Each of the edges was neatly labeled with a small letter, and each of the angles with a large one. He wore a handsome beret on his top, and peering intently from one of the several surfaces was a very serious face. Perhaps, if you look at the picture, you'll know what I mean. When he reached the car, the figure doffed his cap and recited a loud, clear voice. So here's the picture they're talking about. So, once again, he has many different sides, doesn't he? Many different faces, too. So it looks like he has a face for every emotion. My angles are many, my sides are not few. I'm a dodecahedron. Who are you? What's a dodecahedron? Inquired Milo, who was barely able to pronounce the strange word. So, see for yourself, he said, turning around slowly. A dodecahedron is a mathematical shape with 12 faces. Just as he said it, 11 other faces appeared, one on each surface, and each one wore a different expression. I usually use one at a time, he confided, as all but the smiling one disappeared again. It saves wear and tear. What are you called? Milo, said Milo. That is an odd name, he said, changing his smiling face from a frowning one. And you only have one face? Is that bad? Asked Milo, making sure it was still there. You'll soon wear it out using it for everything, replied the dodecahedron. Now I have one for smiling, one for laughing, one for crying, one for frowning, one for thinking, and one for pouting, and 6 more besides. Is everyone with one face called a Milo? Oh no, said Milo. Some are called Henry, and some are called George, or Robert, or John, and lots of other things. How terribly confusing, he cried. Everything here is called exactly what it is. The triangles are called triangles, the circles are called circles, and even the same numbers have the same name. Why, can you imagine what would happen if we would name 2's Henry, or George, or Robert, or John, or lots of other things? You'd have to say Robert plus John equals 4, and if the 4's name was Albert, then that would be hopeless. I never thought of it that way, Milo admitted. Then I suggest you begin at once, admonished the dodecahedron. From this admonishing face, for here in Digitopolis everything is quite precise. Then perhaps you can help us decide which road to take, said Milo. By all means, he replied happily. There's nothing to it. If a small cart can carry 3 people at 30 miles an hour for 10 minutes along the road for 5 miles along at 11:35 in the morning, start at the same time as 3 people who have been traveling in a little automobile for 20 miles an hour for 15 minutes on another road exactly twice as long as 1/2 the distance of the other, while a dog and a bug and a boy travel the equal distance in the same time or the same distance in the equal time along a 3rd row in mid-October, then which one arrives first and which is the best way to go? 17! Shouted the humbug, scribbling furiously on a piece of paper. Well, I'm not sure, but Milo stammered, but several minutes later, a fantastic figuring. You'll have to do better than that, scolded the dodecahedron, or you'll never know how far you've gone or whether or not you've gotten there. I'm not very good at problems, admitted Milo. What a shame, said the dodecahedron. They're so very useful. Why, did you know that if a beaver 2 feet long with a tail a 1.5 long can build a dam 12 feet high and 6 feet wide in 2 days, all you would need to build Boulder Dam is a beaver 68 feet long and with a tail 51 foot tall. Where would you find a beaver that big? Grumbled the humbug as his pencil point snapped. I'm sure I don't know, he replied, but if you did, you'd certainly know what to do with him. That's absurd, objected Milo, whose head was spinning from the numbers and questions. That may be true, he acknowledged, but it comes completely accurate, and as long as the answer is right, who cares what the question is wrong? If you want sense, you'll have to make it yourself. All 3 roads arrived at the same place at the same time, interrupted Talk, while he patiently had been doing the first problem. Correct, shouted the dodecahedron, and I'll take you there myself. Now, you can see how important problems are. If you hadn't done this one properly, you might have gone the wrong way. I can't see where I made my mistake, said the humbug. But if all the roads arrive at the same place at the same time, then aren't they all the right way? Asked Milo. Certainly not, he shouted, glaring from the most upset face. They're all the wrong way. Just because you have a choice doesn't mean any of them has to be right. He walked to the sign and quickly spun it around 3 times. As he did, the 3 rows vanished and one new one suddenly appeared, heading the direction of the sign now pointed. Is every road 5 miles from Dictionopolis? Asked Milo. I'm afraid it has to be, said the dodecahedron, leaping into back of the car. It's the only sign we've got. The new road was quite bumpy and full of stones, and each time they hit one, the dodecahedron bounced into the air and landed on one of his faces with a sulk, or a smile, or a laugh, or a frown, depending upon which one it was. Well, we'll soon be there, he announced happily after one of his short flights. Welcome to the land of numbers. It doesn't look very inviting, said the bug, as they clambered higher and higher. Not a tree nor a blade of grass could be seen anywhere, or a rock, only the rock remained. Is this the place where the numbers are made? Asked Milo as the car lurched again, and this time the dodecahedron sailed off down the mountainside, head over heels and grunt over grimace, until he landed, sad side up, at what looked like the entrance to a cave. They're not made, he replied, as if nothing had happened. You have to dig for them. Don't you know anything at all about numbers? Well, I don't think they're very important, snapped Milo, too embarrassed to admit the truth. Not important, roared the dodecahedron, turning red with fury. Could you have tea for two without the two, or the three blind mice without the three? Would there be four corners of the earth if there weren't a four? And how would you sail the seven seas without a seven? All I meant was, began Milo, but the dodecahedron, overcome with emotion and shouting furiously, carried right on. If you had high hopes, how would you know how high they were? And did you know that a narrow escape comes in all different widths? Would you travel the whole wide world without ever knowing how wide it was? And how could you do anything at long last, he concluded, waving his arms over his head, without knowing how long the last was? Why, numbers are the most beautiful and valuable thing in the world. Just follow me and I'll show you. He turned on his heels and stalked off into the cave. I can't wait. Come along, he shouted from the dark hole. I can't wait for you all day. And in a moment they followed him into the mountain. It took several minutes for their eyes to become accustomed to the dim light. And during this time, strange scratching, scraping, tapping, scuffling noises could be heard all around them. Put these on, instructed the dodecahedron, handing each of them a helmet and a flashlight attached to the top. Where are we going? Whispered Milo, for it seemed like a kind of place you would whisper. We're here, he replied with a sweeping gesture. This is the numbers mine. Milo squinted into the darkness and saw for the first time that they had entered a vast cavern lit only by a soft, eerie glow from the great stalactites which hung ominously from the ceiling. Passages and corridors, honeycombs and walls wound their way from floor to ceiling, up and down the sides of the caves, and everywhere they looked, Milo saw little men no bigger than himself, busy digging and chopping, shoving and scraping, pulling and tugging, carts full of stone in one place or another. Right this way, instructed the dodecahedron, and watch your step. As he spoke, his voice echoed and re-echoed again, mixing and sounding with a buzz of activity all around them. Talk trotted along next to Milo, and the humbug stepped daintily, followed behind whose mine it was. Asked Milo, stepping around two of the loaded wagons. By the 4,827,659 hairs on my head, it's mine, of course, bellowed a voice from across the cavern, and straight across they came to a figure who could only have been the math magician. He was dressed in a long, flowy robe, covered eerily with complex mathematical equations, and a tall, pointed cap that made him look very wise. In his left hand he carried a long staff with a pencil point at the end and a large rubber eraser on the other. It's a lovely mine, apologized the humbug, who was always intimidated by loud noises. The biggest numbers mine in the kingdom, said the math magician proudly. Are there any precious stones in it? Asked Milo excitedly. Precious stones? He roared even louder than before, and then he leaned over towards Milo and whispered softly, by the 8,247,312 threads on my robe. I'll say there are. Look here. He reached into the cart and pulled out a small object which he polished vigorously on his robe. Then he held it up to the light and it sparkled brightly. But that's a 5, objected Milo, for that was certainly what it was. Exactly, agreed the math magician. As valuable a jewel as you'll find anywhere. Look at some of the others. He scooped up a great handful of stones and poured them into Milo's arms. They included all the numbers from 1 to 9, and even an assortment of zeros. We dig them and polish them right here, volunteered the dodecahedron, pointing to a group of workers busily employed at the buffing wheels. And then we send them all over the world. Marvelous, aren't they? They are exceptional, said Talk, who had a special fondness for numbers. So that's where they come from, said Milo, looking in awe at the glittering collection of numbers. He returned them to the dodecahedron as carefully as possible, as he did, and one dropped to the floor with a smash and broke it to 2. The humbug winced, and Milo looked terribly concerned. Oh, don't worry about that, said the math magician, and he scooped up the pieces. We use the broken ones for fractions. Haven't you any diamonds or emeralds or rubies? And there he is. Asked the bug irritably, for he was quite disappointed in what he'd seen so far. Yes, indeed, the math magician replied, leading them over to the rear of the cave. Right this way. There, piled an enormous amount of mounds that reached almost the ceiling, were not only diamonds and emeralds and rubies, but also sapphires, amethyst, topaz, and granite. It was the most amazing mass of wealth that they'd ever seen. They're such a terrible nuisance, sighed the math magician, and no one can think of what to do with them. Now, he said, taking a silver whistle from his pocket and blowing it loud, let's have some lunch. And for the first time in his life, the astonished bug couldn't think of a thing to say. And here the math magician is again, with all those numbers on his coat. And that is the end of our chapter today. So tomorrow's chapter 15, This Way to Infinity. And we'll find out what happens then. Okay, you have a wonderful day.